Hello and welcome back to Barkland Labs. Today we are learning how to distill ethanol and how to use a couple of analytical tests to determine we have made it. If you were a good old boy from Alabama, you'd just call this making moonshine. So we are starting with our Erlenmeyer flask and our bromothymol blue. Notice my bromothymol blue is still yellow. That tells me the reaction is still happening. If I hold it up really close, you may or may not be able to notice a few bubbles still going on in there. But just for the sake of distilling this, I'm going to go ahead and dump out the bromothymol blue and give your container a little rinse out. And you can actually use this, use your bromothymol blue container if it's large enough to filter your mixture. So first things first, you can remove that, remove your stopper and tubing. Put a paper towel, filter paper could work, but we really don't even need that. Paper towel and a funnel into your container, and be careful not to agitate this. You want to leave the yeast on the bottom there if possible. And actually, I want you to listen and watch that. You're hearing a lot of fizzing going on right now. It sounds kind of like a soda. That's because of all the carbon dioxide that's probably dissolved inside of that water right now. It's because it's becoming pressurized in there. So I'm going to, while that's working, I'm going to show you a couple other things you could set up. You can get a few of your filter papers made with the permanent marker. You could get your couple of test tubes set up. Notice I've got my Bunsen burner going already, and I've got my ice water bath over here. So it might take a little while for this to completely filter through. So I'd recommend you get some of those other things going, get all the rest of your materials together after you have that dripping. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it. I'm going to pick it up in a minute here. Hey, so part two here. This is going a little bit slow, so I actually went ahead and put my funnel in the ring, and I'm letting this drip down directly into my beaker. Notice that I poured out almost all of my mixture. I left all that really yeasty stuff behind, and if you wanted to wait for this to go all the way through and then dump this in to see if you could filter it, you can, but it's kind of thick and murky. So I would just be very careful as you're pouring not to agitate it, and then that last bit you can try that at the end to see if that works. What you can try then too is you can take one of your strips of filter paper with a permanent marker on it, and you can just go ahead and stick that in there if you wanted to, and do a little bit of that chromatography. Let that mixture run up your filter paper. If it makes that marker run, remember that tells you you might have some ethanol there. If it doesn't make it run, it tells you maybe you don't have all that much. I already did that one time with this filter paper right here. You can see that it ran maybe just the tiniest little bit. So that tells me that I don't have a ton of ethanol in here. That's fine. This mixture should be around 10% ethanol, 90% water, based on what baker's yeast is able to do. Once it reaches too high of a threshold of ethanol in there, it actually basically shuts down that fermentation reaction that's happening there. So I'm going to pause it and I'll restart once I've got the rest of this filtered. Okay, so now that I've got my filtered mixture here, I'm going to go ahead and take my Erlenmeyer flask. Just give that a nice little rinse out. Say goodbye to your yeast. It can go right down the drain. Wish it a better life. And you're going to put that back onto your ring stand. How the heck do I clamp this? Okay, so you put that back on your ring stand and drop that down. You can pour your water and ethanol mixture back into the flask. And now we are going to start heating it. So you can put your Bunsen burner underneath here. You can get your thermometer and your L tube set up here. And with this one, we're really not worried about it going all the way down because, like I said, probably about 10% of it's ethanol, the rest of it's water. Get our ice bath over here. So what we are looking for now is monitoring the temperature. You will know the boiling point of ethanol in the lab. You'll be looking for that for when it starts to boil, what temperature that is, and then you're going to be collecting that distillate into your test tube here, so I'm going to fast forward a bit to when I actually have some of this distilling. And as an FYI, remember, be really, really careful with this tubing. Ethanol is going to be coming through here in gaseous form. Remember, ethanol is very flammable, so you really don't want to touch it to the wire mesh. You'll burn a hole in that, and then you'll be spraying a flammable gas onto a flame. Let's really avoid that. I have not had anybody make that mistake before because this is our second distillation lab, but let's avoid that. My mixture is boiling along really well. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is necessary to add a boiling stone to your mixture. Mr. Barkland did that at the wrong time. I did it when it was already really hot, and what it actually did was spilled my mixture all over me, the Bunsen burner, the table, because it bubbled over because all of a sudden now there were all kinds of places for bubbles to form. So you don't want to do that. Add that in the beginning before you start heating. Right now the temperature is about 86.0 and you can see that it's boiling pretty well. That's because water boils at about 96-ish in Denver Celsius, and ethanol boils at about 81 degrees Celsius, actually lower than that in Denver. So it's boiling along right now kind of in the middle there. That tells you have a mixture of both of those two chemicals. As the boiling point rises closer and closer to water, that tells you that you're getting less and less ethanol overall in there. A couple other reminders. Remember, when you touch the test tube over here, be careful to touch it by the rubber stopper, not on the L tube or even the glass right here. And you want to keep that as submerged as possible so that the ethanol has the most chance to condense into ethanol from gaseous ethanol back into liquid ethanol. So I've got enough collected in here now that I'm going to swap up my test tube. So we'll just pop that off, pop that on, stick that back on there, and be really careful not to touch your hose to the hot metal. You will melt a hole in your metal and in your tube, and you will now have gaseous flammable fumes spraying out of there near a flame source. Not ideal. So we've got our mixture. It should look kind of cloudy like that. It's probably because of some of the yeast products in there. Also, ethanol sometimes gets a little bit cloudy when it gets cold. So I'm going to pour it into one of our little plastic beakers, and we can test this now. I accidentally just spilled water on paper, so you take your paper strip. I spilled on mine accidentally, so I have to redo it. And now you can do that chromatography. Remember, I don't think I actually used that word. Separating stuff based on their polarities, based on the polarity of the solvent and the ink. So I'm letting that distillate rise through our permanent marker, and we should ideally see it start to cause it to bleed. So this is one analytical test that we can do for ethanol based on its polarity. Remember, water really shouldn't do that. Or if it's a mixture with way more water than ethanol, like when you started. And the other analytical test we'll do in just a second is setting our mixture on fire. So I don't know if you can see it starting to bleed there. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so. And you can do this with a number of the fractions, so I'm still getting more out of there. I'll be able to dump that into my other container and test that to see if that is ethanol. Basically, you want to keep on doing this until you aren't getting any more ethanol. So if I hold that up there, you can see that it definitely is causing it to run. Definitely have ethanol here. So now on Monday, what you're going to be doing, you're going to then do look at all this that I've collected here. You can go ahead and pour this into your other container, this one over here, and now you test this one again, and you should be able to tell if you have ethanol or not based on if it makes it run. I'm going to jump to our last test though here. Spilled. Sorry, spilling everywhere. Going to pour our mixture right here, and if it is in fact ethanol, it should set on fire. If it's just a sugar water mixture left over, it should not set on fire. So I'm going to grab matches and give that a go. And there we go. We've got ethanol burning. I think that's pretty cool that we can take sugar water and yeast and a little bit of time, a little bit of glassware, a little bit of tubing, and we've got ethanol burning there. So those are a couple of the tests that we are going to be doing on this on Monday. I might record an additional video on how to filter much faster using something called vacuum filtration. That's an additional one. If you've maybe got a really big flask of ethanol, you might want to use that. I will see